You all so much for having me and for the willingness to discuss such an intense topic. I'm going to say up front that I'm a little bit nervous about this, and okay, off the compound, in plain sight, coercive control in high control environments. Even though I am a cult scholar, this is mostly going to be about how the definition of cult isn't important, and what we need to look for with child exploitation. And how do I flip my slides? Uh-oh. Okay, here we go. About me, I was born into 3 generations into a religious cult called the Children of God. And the Children of God is probably a cult you've heard of, but maybe can't remember. I think this is because sometimes people block it out, because the Children of God is the most famous for first using religious prostitution to draw people in, and then for promoting pedophilia. I call it pedophilia for God. The Children of God makes the lists of every single extreme list of cults, usually right after all the ones that suicided. And yet, we were not only hidden away in a compound, like maybe the FLDS, the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints polygamous cult, are. We were used around the world in entertainment. But, Children of God childhood, it checks all these blocks of what we think of as cults, right? We have commune life. We have complete isolation from the world, or did we? We did not go to school. We did not sometimes learn the languages of the countries that we were in, other than to perform and sell things. This is a photo of me and some very cute children in Japan. Dressed as soldiers of love in God's army. We have isolation, we have fear, we have policing of self and others. This is actually one of my favoritely named terms in cult studies and maybe all of sociology, because when we are policing each other, it is called performative regulation. And everyone in cults and coercive environments at some point ends up being a perpetrator and being part of this system of exploitation. And then performance culture. And I think the most important thing that is absolutely missed 99% of the time when we talk about cults is that cults are all about labor. And I didn't understand my childhood till I was 32 years old, after I'd already spent 10 years studying cults, until I heard Dr. Janja Lalich, a cult expert, say cults are all about labor. And immediately I understood. Cults are criminal enterprises, and they produce a product, and the product of the Children of God was entertainment. The other reason you've heard of the Children of God is because Jeremy Spencer, one of the founding members of Fleetwood Mac, joined the Children of God and ran an international music and video program that sold hundreds of millions of products around the world. The Children of God produced Rose McGowan and Joaquin and River Phoenix and Daniela Mestinick-Young. And the Children of God was a 10,000 member criminal organization with 7,000 children who were singing, dancing, performing shiny, happy beggars for Jesus. And it wasn't a small operation. We sang twice at the White House in the 90s. We performed for the president of Brazil. And I found out a few weeks ago that we wrote a marching song for Marcos of the Philippines, the dictator, which was once played every hour on the hour. And all of this was done in plain sight of the whole world. Now, I think performance culture shows up in every cult, in every coercive environment. I think that it is because we are teaching the children to perform. And it's a great way to exploit and traffic children within performance. especially if they're singing and dancing and very cute. So I left the cult when I was 15. I went to high school, I went to college, and then I decided to join the Army. There's a lot there. In the prologue of Uncultured, I am on my first day of basic training, holding my duffel bag above my head, going, okay, I joined another cult. Like, I somewhat know how this was going to go. And let me tell you about life in the Army. Quickly. There was compound life. There was isolation. There was fear. There was policing of self and others. There was performance culture. I ran a 5-minute mile, and I looked really pretty in uniform, so I was a good soldier. And cults are all about labor. So, I left the military. I was a captain in the Army. I went to Afghanistan twice. I was an intelligence officer who studied terrorist groups and counterterrorism, and I saw a lot of parallels. And while I was watching someone who very much fit my definition of a cult leader run America, I decided to write this book about it. And I also went back to graduate school at Harvard during COVID, very interesting time to study group behavior and isolation and fear. But really quickly began to realize, one, that my expertise was in bad groups and bad leaders and bad guys. Two, that was useful, but most people didn't realize it. And three, that all of my peers assumed that all of the corporations they were going to go work for were the good guys. Organizational psychologists are those people that work for your corporations and teach them how to motivate you to donate your labor to their good cults. And I thought my ability to diagnose bad groups and know a lot about bad guys was really useful. And I saw that my peers didn't think that. I learned trying to be in leadership consulting that organizations weren't going to pay you to tell them that they're bad. And that also my peers were pretty much okay with learning cult tactics, though. So I decided that I was going to be the disorganizational psychologist, and that I just wanted to use my group experience to help individuals understand groups that have hurt them in the past, groups that are hurting them now, and groups that might try to hurt them in the future, because we are living in a world of interesting times. And this is actually a trend where cults and coercive groups pop up in times of social change. I do not find it to be a coincidence that the cults, the fashion, and the social issues of the 70s are all topics that we are fighting again right now, which is part of how people get pulled into cults, of course. So I'm still a leadership scholar. I just decided to focus on the bad guys. Now I'm writing a book called The Culting of America, where I have defined these 10 parts of group organization that make up a cult, but I show them to you in real cults in the United States military and in America around us. Again, for the purpose of navigating the culty situations, the coercive situations that we are all going to find ourselves in. So, I need to put this down here, right? I have this definition of cult. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I'm about to tell you that the definition really doesn't matter. But I have this, and we have a download that you can have in the end. But it's the normal things, right? Your charismatic leadership, your isolation, your transcendent mission. And the Children of God was a really perfect cult. We just had all the things. And this very convenient harem photo in Time magazine calling us a cult. But as soon as you define cult, I think it's very interesting to look at other organizations. And this is why I say that asking, is it a cult, is actually the wrong question. As a cult baby, the term we've come up for ourselves, I hate everybody's definition of cult, including mine, especially when you put a super cute 10-part listicle on it. Because children and other victims of cults will then be trained to answer exactly to that listicle and to that definition. Actually, the chapter of Children of God programming their children to lie, to be returned to the organization that was sexually abusing them and trafficking them, is published in Rolling Stone magazine because it's pretty incredible. So I think that even though what makes a cult, right, is the most asked question, which is followed by, can we have good cults? Which I find to be a very patriarchal question. I go back before this. My degree's in literature from UT Dallas, language, right? What are we trying to say when we use the word cult? Because we are going to argue about the definition for forever. And I'm not the deity that names cults, that's the media. And it happens usually when they can measure the damage in bodies, in murdered bodies or raped bodies or suicided bodies or branded bodies. And we always look back and we find that cult experts had been warning for years, but nobody really listens. I think what we're trying to say when we say cult is that an individual has come under coercive control and they are therefore no longer like in possession of their own thoughts, their own actions, etc. This is why I think you can't have good cults. Good cults do not coerce and manipulate you in order to exploit your labor. I think that the opposite of cult is group that doesn't coerce you. And I think the opposite of cult leader is not good cult leader. It's leader who doesn't manipulate you. Just a couple things I wanted to tell you while I had your attention is cult leaders always want you busy, tired, alone, hungry, skinny, and pregnant. Please apply that liberally to our country right now. And it absolutely, and twin weapons of attitude and appearance control are things that are very, very important to coercive control. One of the things that I tell college freshmen when I go to speak to the kids is, if any group is trying to recruit you and everybody is shiny and happy and pretty and bouncy, run. Because you and your 5 friends don't all show up like that on the same day. That's attitude and appearance control. And that's what makes the shiny, happy people work. And I don't think it matters what you call it. Every expert ever has said that all cults are the same. And I think it's very similar to doing anti-terrorism work. We look at the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures that are used. And I cannot belabor the point enough that cults are organized crime. They're all about labor, free, cheap, and exploited labor, often usually of children. And we miss that because we're arguing about the definition of cult, or saying it's this phenomenon that we can't understand. I am often asked what mystifies me about cults, and the answer is nothing. Cult leaders are not magic. They are not prophets. We know the formula. So what do cults look like in everyday life? Because almost every American is sure that they do not know people in cults, and they do not know children that are being exploited, even though the numbers show that 1 in 4 children in America are being sexually abused in their homes or by people very close to them, including religious leaders. So cults in everyday life. We have 3 forms of cults, but I'm going to give you 4. 1 is commune cults, the big cults. We'll talk about all of these. 2 is one cults, sometimes called abusive relationships outside of cult studies. 3 are single family cults. And 4 are internet cults. And I say kind of, because all of these could be internet cults. That's a new thing that we now deal with that has both helped us go after cults and also helped create them. So, the commune cults, the extreme story. These are the cults from Hollywood Central Casting. This is a real picture of children of God. This is what people think of when they hear the word cult. It is as extreme as they come. It ticks all of the boxes, right? But people still couldn't recognize that from the outside. 4 countries took the children away from the children of God and then gave them back. In England, in Argentina, the judge and the police were censured by the government for going after these people. It looked normal. It looked unthreatening, at least. And there were good people in the sex cult too, because people don't actually break into good and bad. That's something we also forget when we talk about how nice Mormons are. There are 1-1 cults that are abusive relationships. It can be extremely hard to recognize from the outside. The important thing about these other forms of cults is they still tick all my 10 boxes. You sometimes just have to understand how to recognize that. What might it be like if a 16-year-old girl dated a much older man? The other thing I tell every college freshman I possibly can is that when somebody is complimenting you, telling you you're so mature for your age, they're not complimenting you, they are targeting you. Because we get precocious maturity from growing up out of order, which often implies childhood trauma. And predators know how to look for that. The question for all of you, of course, is how could 1-1 cults impact the way that a child is cared for in their first 3 years? There's a very good book that I think shows both a 1-1 cult and a single family cult, and it is called I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. And 1-1 cults are programming you into disorganized attachment because all cults want you dissociated so that you're fully functioning little meat puppets that can labor for them. Before I get into single family cults, I'm going to read a slide to you, and I'm sorry for this, but I think it's important to read the definition of disorganized attachment by Dr. Alexandra Stein. If any of you are military veterans, you will be thinking of your drill sergeants, and you will be correct. Totalist leaders, either directly or through their organizations, create a relationship of disorganized attachment by isolating people from their prior sources of support and replacing those with a new and frightening safe haven. We know from attachment research that disorganized attachments, which involves seeking proximity with the frightening attachment figure when there is no other attachment figure or escape available, causes a dissociative response. Dissociation separates thinking from feeling. It disintegrates the left, logical, verbal, thinking side of the brain from the right, emotional, nonverbal side of the brain. The dissociated person's ability to think clearly about the relationship is impaired, and so they are now in a position to accept the group's views, its ideology. This ideology is in place to further bolster the elements of isolation, terror, and love, and to explain away feelings of fear induced in the follower. Emotionally, the dissociated person tends to draw closer to the group, and it is now their only remaining safe haven. It's part of the love bombing. We come out of basic training in love with our drill sergeants and ready to do anything for the people who have been terrorizing us for the last 8 to 12 weeks. And then sometimes we go straight to officer school and have to be their peers. In single family cults, and what's very important about the experience of cult babies or children growing up in coercive environments is that they are growing up in disorganized attachment. I think it's really important to remember that disorganized attachment creates dissociation, and this is where cults want you. There's been a study done on what I call the cult glaze, but what the study called Mormon face, which I believe is living in this constant state of dissociation. Single family cults also tick all of the boxes on the checklist. We've all heard of one called the Westboro Baptist Church. They're usually headed by both a narcissist and an enabler. And it's very, very important for me to emphasize that both of these people are abusers. The questions for you, of course, is what might that look like for a family with young children that you might come into contact with? A final thing is all cults use and abuse familial language. We are your brothers and your sisters and your family and your father and your mother. It's part of how they break you from your logical thinking patterns. And single family cults do this as well. There's also a thing called cult hopping, which I think is really, really relevant, where people come out of high control environments either because they were raised in them or because they joined them looking for something and have a tendency to return to other high control environments. I think we kind of go cult hopping to safer and safer cults while we are healing sometimes. But a lot of these high control groups and systems that people might encounter that many people might not think of as cult experiences or coercive experiences can be this list we have here. It's like really important to understand that cult babies, children raised in coercive environments and coercive control, can be the ones that turn around and traffic their own children or allow them to be coerced in these coercive environments because they don't understand what happened to them, or they don't see the harm, or they don't see a way out of the system. My mother stayed in the Children of God until she was 39 years old and had 8 children. This is really important point in Uncultured when someone tells me that I'm not as different as I think I am. And I like to turn this around now and say that cults are not as different as you think they are from your regular organizations. And you will find a lot of this high control dynamics when you look around, especially in America. And now, of course, the child exploitation in high control environments. And the first thing I actually want to do is play you a little bit of one of these videos of the Children of God that I'm talking about. And I'm going to give the screen to Stephanie for a minute. Stephanie? I just want to play, it's like the first minute or something. We can stop it after it says the confusion and pollution gets in God's hair. This is me as a 10-year-old. Oh no, we can't hear it. Do you want people to watch the first minute of it, or do you just want them to do that later? Okay. Should I start again? Okay. So I wanted to show that because I wanted people to really understand that this was not a small operation. This was a multi-million-dollar production. And I had a very weird moment once when I shared it on social media, and somebody said, "Oh my gosh," someone from a regular evangelical church, the Cult of Churchianity, said, I grew up watching this, and I always used to wonder how they got you kids to do that. And it was such a weird moment for me, because the answer was they beat us, and they starved us, and they trained us to perform on cue since birth. But that's not what it looks like. We were the reason that we were given back to the sex cult. And this is a quote from Uncultured: "I was almost as afraid to leave as I was that I would have to stay." Because children can be used as collateral to exploit parents and siblings who want to protect them. My mother, who was born into the Children of God, was kidnapped by the cult from her mother when she left and disappeared at the age of 6. Didn't see her mom again until she was 30. So you better believe that she and us, her children, spent our entire childhoods and adulthoods performing really, really hard so that they wouldn't take us away from each other. The parentification of older siblings is another way that children are trafficked and exploited in large exploitative families and religious systems. And actually, I have found, and I'm talking about in my book, 4 areas. We generally have pretty good child labor laws, although they are trying to take us back. But there are 4 areas, which are performance, restaurant work, childcare, and agriculture, in which children are heavily, heavily trafficked, often by their own families and by religious systems. And performance culture, I think, is especially relevant to the babies, the young children, and how they are being used and exploited. When they wanted to put this photo on the cover of the book, I had one request: I will exploit all of the pain of my life, but do not put my face on the book cover. Because when I look at this photo, I don't see a smiling, happy, performing child. I see a 2-year-old that I can't even understand why she's so sad, and I am that 2-year-old. And so I may have yelled at some people that putting my face on the cover of that book is what child exploitation looks like on a book cover. and we sang twice at the White House. Often, the youngest of children are used to validate the exploitation. The fact that I could read and quote the King James Version Bible. The fact that I could baila la bamba, ay, 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 fala portugués y español with the best of them at very young ages was used to keep me under control. Because nobody looks at dancing, shiny children and asks if they are okay, if they are being paid. We were not. If they are being taken care of. Jim Bob Duggar of 19 and Counting did not question for one instant whether any of his children were going to break rank and talk about any of the abuses with the camera crew, because those children had been trained to perform from birth. The FBI going into Waco, Texas, the Branch Davidians. And I just have to tell y'all Texans, the first time I drove through Waco and it was not an apocalypse landscape, it was a very weird experience for me. Because I grew up being terrorized about Waco, Texas. When we read the FBI files, the FBI is so impressed with the children that the 3 and 4-year-olds will sit for hours in the middle of the night and listen to the prophet preach. And 3-year-old children do that because they are terrified. So this is why the performance culture is very, very important. And I think something that needs to be looked at very, very, very closely. And I also just cannot emphasize enough that we cannot ask the children if they are okay. There's one more thing, which is that cult leaders learn how to do it. Sometimes from growing up in cults, single family cults, being in 1-1 cults, often because they're studying it and practicing it on people their whole lives before they finally figure it out. I do not believe that cults start by accident. But there are high control systems, and there are many of them, and I'm going to name some and upset people, but systems like Alcoholics Anonymous, Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, some parts of the Catholic Church, the military, and others give individuals the recipe for how to build single-family cults. It's said in the documentary Shiny Happy People that what Bill Gothard did was make every father a cult and every home an island. And again, we have pretty decent protections from abuse and labor, but it's really, really hard when it comes into families and religions. We had a whole thing called the cult wars in the 70s and 80s, where religious leaders realized that if we put laws against coercive control into place, they were going to lose control as well. And so we have no laws protecting children when it's the people closest to them. And I guarantee you these coercive control individuals know the laws better than maybe even you, even if you work in it. And the kids know how to perform. So I really think it's also harder for people to realize and see the control if it was done to them or if they had a good experience in that system. And until we understand that cults are always, always, always about labor, physical and emotional, we will not be able to spot it when it's in play. That's my spiel, and I would love to have questions. I mean, mostly just number of people, right? So this is why I think that like Jeanette McCurdy's relationship with her mother was both a 1-1 cult and a single family cult. But yeah, it's just number of people usually. So first of all, Texas. Um, it's interesting in the 1830s, one era of cults, it was upstate